Hi and welcome to In Focus. I'm Loretta Boniti. From policies to staffing to oversight, the Veterans Affairs healthcare system has been under the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. But in recent years, the system meant to serve our military veterans is seeing a turnaround through federal, state, and local community efforts. The Department of Veterans Affairs is responsible for one of the biggest healthcare systems in the entire country. And there's no secret that for years it's been plagued by problems and unacceptable care.
For so many years, I don't know what happened, but it was not providing the services it should have, and now I think they're really working on it.
North Carolina is home to one of the largest veteran populations in the United States. And the vets living here say they have some of their own stories of the VA concerns.
Yeah, one of the things that I have a problem with is that they say that they can't find my medical records. And I've been experiencing some pains from some achy breaky from when I was in the military. And I put in for some assistance insofar as veterans benefits is concerned since 2004. And I've been turned down because they say that they can't find my medical records.
I'm dealing a lot with the dental clinic, and I've got a doctor now that is giving me a glimmer of hope, but because of their system here in Fayetteville, they have interns that come, and my major concern is that they do work, but then a doctor doesn't come behind them.
Efforts have been made at the national level to improve the VA system, and by many accounts, those efforts are working. For those who work within the system, they say part of the success has been through outreach programs and by building coalitions in local communities.
We understand that we can't do this by ourselves and that we do seek the support of others in meeting our veterans' needs.
This week, we're going in focus on Veterans Affairs and improvements that are being made at the VA. We're going to begin our conversation with Representative Richard Hudson, who is a Republican who represents North Carolina's 8th Congressional District. Also just filed a bill recently that would help with the electronic process of getting the veterans' information online. Representative Hudson, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Great to be with you again, Loretta. Thank you.
Well, so let's start with that overarching question first. Folks have been watching for at least a decade now as the veterans' health issues have been scrutinized. Do you think that we have seen some significant improvements?
I do think we've seen significant improvements. You know, this last budget is the most money we've ever spent on veterans health care, which is only one measure, but it's a good start. We've also made significant reforms at the VA. You know, President Trump signed the VA Mission Act into law last year, which helps consolidate all the different programs that allow veterans to access private care into one program that's easy to access. Because I believe, and I've always felt that veterans ought to have the option to go to the private sector for health care, particularly when they live a long ways away from a VA facility, or if they have a certain type of condition that requires a specialty that they might be better served to find in the private sector. So I've long supported this idea of access to private care for folks in the VA system. The VA Mission Act is a good first start for that. Also expanded care for pre-9/11 caregivers. And also we've passed several pieces of legislation in the last several years that allow us to fire bad actors at the VA, for example. So I think we've made some good progress. I think there's a lot of things that we need to continue doing. One of those areas, as you mentioned, is the electronic health records. You know, veterans come to my office every day, and I've served over 4,000 veterans who needed assistance while I've been in Congress. But they'll come to my office with stacks of their forms and their health care paperwork and all the different papers they've accumulated while they were on active duty and since. And they're just stacks of papers to go through. And you wonder, in this day and age where we do everything on our iPhone, everything's electronic, I can scan a check and it goes into my bank account, why we can't have electronic health records so that when that soldier transitions out of the DOD system into the VA system, those records ought to seamlessly transition as well. So we're making progress finally on getting those electronic records set up.
Let's talk about the Department of Veterans Affairs Electronic Health Record Advisory Committee Act. I just want to say the name in case anybody wants to look it up. Tell me specifically what this piece of legislation aims to do.
Sure. Well, and for years we've tried to get the VA records electronic and spent billions of dollars, billions with a B, and have made no progress. In fact, a couple years ago, I had a constituent come to me and say they were at a appeals hearing at the VA in Winston-Salem, and there were 2 tape recorders on the desk. And he said, "Why do you have 2 tape recorders?" He said, "Because we have to ship one of these tapes to San Diego, California, so someone can transcribe it, send the transcript back to us, and then we're going to enter that into the computer." That was how they were doing electronic records. And so the VA is actually, under President Trump, is making tremendous progress moving towards an electronic system the same as the DOD. And so they're making progress. They're doing a demonstration project out in Washington State. But what my legislation does is says, let's have an outside board that represents our veterans, our stakeholders, that can have oversight over this process. So as we start to roll out electronic records across the VA system, I want to have citizens' input, citizen oversight of what the VA is doing. So we trust the VA, but we want to verify.
There is currently the Veterans Information Systems and Technology Architecture, or VISTA, which is set to go live next year. That's part of this electronic record keeping. Does this help? Does this legislation go hand in hand with yours?
It does, and all I'm trying to say is let's make sure that veterans have input as we roll this out, so that we can hopefully foresee some potential risks and head those off. But also ensure that the implementation is happening the way it ought to be happening, because at the end of the day, this is about the veteran, and are we providing them with a service in a way that's accessible for them? And so I want to give them input throughout this process, rather than just relying on the VA to report back to Congress on how they're doing. Let's have some oversight from the outside. And so, sure, it works hand in glove with what's being done. You know, we've appropriated a significant amount of money to do this demonstration project, and the plan is over 10 years to roll this out section by section throughout the whole VA. So at the end of that time period, the VA will have the exact same record system as the DOD. It'll be housed at the DOD facility, so that we'll have the extra security that comes with DOD systems. But we're talking about a whole lot of records, a whole lot of terabytes of information, and so it's going to take some time.
We should mention that your district includes Fort Bragg in it, so you work with a lot of active duty and veterans as your constituents. How much do these health care issues come up with them as you're talking to them?
Well, it's a huge issue, and when you talk about older veterans, World War II veterans, a lot of them lost their records in a fire in a federal warehouse in St. Louis years ago. So for a lot of veterans, those records don't exist anymore. They were burned up. And so that just shows the importance of needing these electronic versions of these records and have them backed up in a secure server at the DOD, so that later they can be accessed, so we don't have this problem of missing records. But you know, we have so many issues where, you know, as an active duty person, they may have an injury or had some issue, but they don't have the paperwork and documentation from back then. Now they're, you know, older, further along in their life, they're a veteran, and they want to apply for benefits based on, you know, a legitimate either, you know, injury that occurred during battlefield or certainly during their service, and they don't have the paper trail. And so we have to go back and try and build that paper trail. And now it's done, you know, through hard paper. It ought to be seamless. It ought to be electronic. We ought to be able to pull all the DOD records from anyone's service time in the military, and it ought to be transferred seamlessly to the VA so that we don't have this issue and make it, again, it's about the veteran and about the type of service they're getting, and this will certainly improve that.
Okay, Representative Richard Hudson, we want to thank you so much for joining us today.